Well, I had a very different video planned for you today, but I have run afoul of YouTube's copyright laws. Now, I'm right and they're wrong, and I will argue it out with them, but certainly the battle is not going to be resolved by the time this video needs to post. So I've remade it, but I hope to get the original one to you eventually. Today, we are continuing with our series of design trends through the years, and we got as far back as 1840, the beginning of the Victorian era, and now we are looking at the Federal period. And there are a number of different types of furniture in this period. We're going to start with American and British furniture. But the French had a very significant contribution to this, and we'll handle that separately. So stay tuned. We'll get right to it. In the late 18th century, this is the late 1700s, going into the very early 1800s, in England, there were three major furniture designers. They call them the Big Three: Chippendale, Hepplewhite, and Sheridan. That's in chronological order. And then there was Duncan Phyfe in the United States, who pretty much carried on that tradition. These furniture designers had, especially Hepplewhite, Sheridan, and Phyfe, had very innovative designs. Chippendale designed in many, many genres. Some of them were very innovative. Some of them were merely continuations of what had gone before. And we are going to handle Chippendale very separately because he probably really deserves it. Today, we're going to talk about George Hepplewhite, kind of, sort of, and an interior decorator that I'm pretty sure is going to surprise you. So why would I say George Hepplewhite, kind of, sort of? Well, let's start with his dates. I've got them written down here. George Hepplewhite, 1727 to 1786. So we know almost nothing about George Hepplewhite. We know that he died in 1786. We know that prior to that, he had a furniture shop in London. We don't even know with any great certainty what year he was born, so 1727 is just a presumed date. This was a man who, in his lifetime, was a person of so little consequence, we don't even know when he was born. But 2 years after he died, a book of furniture designs was published in his name that was just nothing short of revolutionary. Some of the most beautiful furniture of the period. And it was originally published in 1788. It's 2 years after he died. And it had a reissue in 1789 and then another reissue in 1790. And went on to be of great influence to the next two designers, the ones we're going to look at next week, Sheridan and Duncan Phyfe. Well, the question arises, did he actually design this furniture? And there's a lot of historical dispute about this. The book, as I say, was published 2 years after his death. He didn't make any of the furniture in question in his lifetime, and the book was published by his wife, Alice. And there is a certain group of historians who are questioning whether or not George Hebblewhite really was the designer of this furniture, or was it in fact Alice herself? Personally, I subscribe to the Alice theory. If George Hebblewhite had produced this kind of furniture in his lifetime, we would almost certainly have heard of him long before his death, not 2 years after. And the furniture, the characteristics of this furniture, the Hebblewhite style, is elegance, light, beautiful lines, soft lines and curves, very little carved ornamentation. The ornamentation was usually painted decorations or inlays in the wood. So it was a very two-dimensional decorative form. And it was not like what had come before. It was unique. And usually when a furniture maker has come up with something this innovative, people know about it. They know about it right away. When the books were published, when the first book was published, the one that Alice published 2 years after his death, became an instant sensation. And it influenced furniture making right up till the Victorian era. And we will see that as we look at more of this furniture. We're going to be looking at Hebblewhite now. When we look at Sheraton later, you're going to be able to see this and say, oh yeah, that's just Hebblewhite 2.0. Duncan Fife, Hebblewhite 2.1. If he had, in fact, produced the furniture and the designs in his lifetime, it would have attracted as much attention then as it did when they were published after his death. So I subscribe to the Alice done it theory. And let's take a look at some Hebblewhite furniture. This is just an overview of some Hebblewhite pieces. Okay. I focused primarily on the wood pieces so you could see the two-dimensional decoration, that it's painted, it's marqueterie, which is just wood incised in veneers, so that the design is made from a thin strip of wood that is put together like a jigsaw puzzle. Beautiful, beautiful designs. So the question is, was it George or was it Alice? We may never know. If it had been Alice, she wouldn't have been able to produce these designs under her own name. And so that would explain why it would have been produced under her late husband's name. So, I don't know. The argument sounds good to me. We We also have some upholstered pieces, and let's take a look at those. This is just a collection of Hebblewhite sofas. So take a peek. You can see the elegance of these pieces. Um, there is nothing clunky or boxy. It does not resemble the Chippendale furniture that immediately preceded it, or the Queen Anne furniture that preceded the Chippendale, or the Gothic furniture that preceded the Queen Anne. Very innovative, very light. Uh, the White House is full of pieces like this. This is just wonderful, elegant furniture. But since there was no photography in this period, it simply had not yet been invented. Even if we could see rooms, the best we could ever do would be artists' representations of rooms, which, as we know, would be done in the most flattering ways and would not have shown things like some of the images we've seen in previous uh, videos, where the ironing is hanging on the fireplace, and things are out of place here and there. The rooms are lived in. So do we have a sense of how people lived in this room, in these rooms? And the thing is, yes, we do. And it's not really what we might expect. First of all, in this period, the wealthy had these elegant pieces of furniture. The people who were not wealthy had tables and chairs and beds if they were lucky. So we're talking about a period of just incredibly rigid class structure, strong divides. There were rich, there were poor. There was very little in the way of a middle class. Um, there certainly was more of a middle class in the U.S. England did have a merchant class, but the fact is that the poor were so very, very poor that anybody with money seemed extremely wealthy by comparison. When people could afford this sort of furniture, the furniture tended to be stacked up against the walls. The sofas and the settees were against a wall. And there was that table. Remember, we discussed this. We started seeing this table when we got into the 1920s and 30s, that table in the middle of the room. In this period, of course, there was that table in the middle of the room, but everything else was kind of shunted up against the wall. The table in the middle of the room, even in the elegant households, was a work table. Now, in the elegant households, of course, the work that was done there was elegant. Nobody was, mending underwear at this table. The ladies were doing fine embroidery and whatever elegant ladies did. And the real material work of the household would have been done somewhere else, but not in their fancy parlor. Now, when we look at this, there's something else I want to show you from, as I said, it's an interior designer that we don't think of as an interior designer. Thomas Jefferson, who was, by all reports, quite a Renaissance man. He dabbled in everything. He was a president, and he was a diplomat, and he was an architect, and he was this and that. And he designed window treatments. So we actually have window treatments now that were designed by Jefferson in Monticello. And I've seen some of the sketches of his window treatments. Now, if you'll recall, in the Victorian era, there were masses of draperies. Uh, the windows had a shutter, usually, that would close, block out the light, the air, and fancy little lacy curtains over that. And then heavy draperies over that could be pulled closed in order to block out the draft, and then a valance on top of that. And I'm not sure what purpose the valance served. I think it was purely decorative, but there was enough fabric on these windows to clothe a small army. Jefferson didn't really care for that. Now, Jefferson's designs for curtains are very light. And I've got some images from Monticello. These were based on Jefferson's designs. And you will notice when we see these that it's very, very different from the Victorian heavily draped windows. So let's take a look at the Monticello curtains. Notice very little in terms of draperies. I believe one of those rooms had draperies. Most of them just had a valance with some sheer or lacy curtains. Some of them had a valance only, not even sheer lacy curtains. Jefferson believed in letting the light in. He believed, he had all kinds of ideas. He studied the Native American culture of the Iroquois Confederacy and actually went out and studied their burial mounds and things, and he created theories about them. He planted experimental crops. He believed that breakfast was the most important meal of the day. He had some extremely forward-thinking ideas, and his ideas about curtains, in my opinion, were one of them. I think it's unfortunate that we didn't just adopt this and leave the heavy, ornate Victorian draperies just off the table. And certainly when they came along, they were not influenced by Jefferson. But those pictures give you some idea of the way the rooms looked. Now, having studied Jefferson's writings and his decorating ideas, we know that furniture in this period was upholstered in colors like pink, yellow, blue. And these pieces would all be like in the same room together. You didn't necessarily have all of the furniture in your parlor upholstered in blue. The sofas would be blue, the side chairs would be yellow, something else would be pink. There was a lot of color. He seemed to like that. He also liked pastel colors. What we also see from this period is wallpaper. Now, wallpaper was extremely expensive, and the best wallpaper was imported from France. We had painted walls. In other words, hand-painted walls, not just, roll one color on the wall, but get out there with a brush and paint. Usually they painted little sort of cornice moldings and little designs up at the top of the room or around the doorway, mostly because they couldn't afford to paint the whole room. And the wallpapers, they had murals, they had wallpapers, not unlike we would think of as wallpapers, repeating patterns, but they were not easily produced. They had to come off the large roll, and you would block print individually, very labor intensive. So this was something that the average person could not afford. This was something that was reserved for the really wealthy. So that's something that we're seeing in this period. Now, by the time the Victorians got involved in their fancy fussy wallpaper, which they put everywhere because they loved colors and they loved patterns and they didn't care if it went together, and my goodness, one of the most hideous places on planet Earth is a Victorian residence. It was Victoria's summer residence at Balmoral. If you ever thought that you liked plaids, you need to take a look at Balmoral sometime, because that much plaid makes anybody crazy. Oh, and this is a Hamilton saying that. So the fact is that too much. That was just the Victorians' motto, was just, more is more and more is wonderful. We saw much more restraint in the earlier periods out of financial necessity. And I guess there's a lesson to be learned here. Sometimes the best things come out of necessity. And certainly this is one such thing. We didn't have a lot of heavy use of wallpaper. When we did have wallpapers, they were very often murals. And they were not the quality of wallpaper we would consider today. Our cheapest wallpapers would have probably looked remarkably elegant to these people, because, as I say, all block printed. Maybe they'd line it up properly, maybe they wouldn't. So overall, this is what we're looking at in the early federal period. Painted walls, sometimes with decoration like a frieze across the top or around the doors or windows, lighter curtains, furniture up against the walls with your table in the middle, and multicolors, rooms that were have many different colors of furniture in them. In terms of art on the walls, as with the Victorians, it was largely whatever the women of the household were capable of producing. Unless you were very wealthy, you did not have a great many paintings. If you did have paintings, they were most likely to be portraits, commemoratives of family members. The idea of art for art's sake, for example, a landscape was right behind me, a landscape like that, not very likely. That was something that would have only been in the wealthiest of homes. And so art and embellishments like that were very personal. They would have been created by the householders. When we pick up next Monday, we are going to take a look at Thomas Sheridan and Duncan Fife, and just take a quick look at their contributions to furniture of this period. And let's see, pens. We still have pens to give away. We still have sock puppets to give away, so let me know. The winner of the Koi Platter, What a Nightmare, has not gotten back to me yet. One more week, and I'm going to choose a secondary winner. I'm very sorry, but I can't hold it indefinitely. So, as always, comment. I read your comments. If you want to get in touch with me, This is the best way to do it because I will read it. So have a fantastic day. Have a fantastic week. I'll see you next Saturday for our instructional video, next Sunday for the project video, and next Monday for part 2 of Federal Decor, Sheridan and Duncan Fife. See you then.